Does the president believe, or does the administration feel that there needs to be some form of regulation for Google, or what exactly was the president referring to there?
We'll let you know. We're taking a look at it. We'll let you know.
Could you explain a little bit what you're looking into, what you'd like to see happen there?
No. We're just looking into it.
Okay, just looking into it.
Yeah.
Just leave it at that. Thank you.
I said,
What are you looking into specifically?
we're just do some investigation and some analysis. That's what we do.
Is there any evidence that they actually are censoring anyone's search results?
We're looking into it.
That's great. They're looking into it. Nothing to worry about here. Donald Trump seems convinced Google is out to get him. Here's what he tweeted today. Google search results for Trump news shows only the viewing reporting of fake news media. In other words, they have it rigged for me and others so that almost all stories and news is bad. Fake CNN is prominent. Republican, conservative, and fair media is shut out illegal. 96% of results on Trump news are from national left-wing media. Very dangerous. Google and others are suppressing voices of conservatives and hiding information and news that is good. They are controlling what we can and cannot see. This is a very serious situation. Will be addressed. Google was quick to respond with a statement that said, in part, when users type queries into the Google search bar, our goal is to make sure they receive the most relevant answers in a matter of seconds. Search is not used to set a political agenda, and we don't bias our results toward any political ideology. Jim, did you ever think yourself?
Yeah. Well, I have an idea that might help him a little bit, and that is, say, don't decide or fight taking the flag down to half-mast when Senator John McCain dies, and maybe work on that approval rating a little bit. So, you know, the results reflect what is happening in the world, and there's something very healthy about watching these tech companies and the way that they collate news that will affect political thinking. Absolutely, just not necessarily or not at all from a president when it looks like a sort of a policing of content.
Yeah, well, I don't think anyone would disagree with you on what you just said about the power, the unchecked power of things like Facebook and Google, Twitter, stuff like that. But are you sitting down there where you are? Because I want you to watch and listen to this. This is President Trump just a few moments ago at the White House. Listen to this.
I think Google is really taking advantage of a lot of people, and I think that's a very serious thing, and it's a very serious charge. I think what Google and what others are doing, if you look at what's going on at Twitter, if you look at what's going on in Facebook, they better be careful, because you can't do that to people. You can't do it. We have literally thousands and thousands of complaints coming in, and you just can't do that. So I think that Google and Twitter and Facebook, they're really treading on very, very troubled territory, and they have to be careful. It's not fair to large portions of the population.
So, Jim, could you deal with that while the rest of my head explodes?
Well, I'll be really interested to see what the what regulatory steps the White House and its allies on the Hill propose. I also wonder how Republican rank and file will feel about regulating speech. But it's an absolutely astounding moment, fascinating. If you think about it, Twitter made President Trump's candidacy. It's what he kind of really communicates through, yet he's also tapping into suspicions of the tech giants, which some of which, you know, go to both sides of the aisle. So I'm going to have to sit and think through this one as well, maybe with like a calculator.
What do you think?
So make no mistake here, we're watching a strategy. The strategy in the behavioral science world is called victimology. His defense is going to be, they're framing me. I'm a victim. The courts are out to get me. DOJ's out to get me. The FBI's out to get me. The intelligence community, the courts, and now Google and social media are all out to get me. If that's the best he can do in his defense, then we're going to be okay. But here's the problem, and here's the serious part of this. While he's talking about Google being biased against him, the reality is that the Russian bots are still out there trying to influence search engines, trying to influence Twitter, Facebook accounts, and messages. So he's right when he says it's rigged, but unfortunately it's rigged in his favor because the Russians are still out there doing this.
Michael, do you want to rush up to the Hill to tell the Republican members of the Senate what Frank just pointed out, that the Russians are still attacking us? mess?
Yeah, you would think they figured that out by now, but they don't care. I mean, it obviously don't. And to hear the president stand up in the Oval Office and say that is just absolute drivel. The idea that, you know, he looks at Google and considers it rigged against him, because again, it's all about him. It's not about the fact that millions of people search Google and get all kinds of information, some good, some bad, some correct, some incorrect. But now it's a national crisis where he's going to lump it all together and, to Frank's point, sort of create this new narrative of victimhood about poor Donald Trump. And that, again, is one more offense that I suspect a lot of folks on Capitol Hill will be silent about.
Sam, you realize that Google's been out to get me for years.
Yeah, I looked at your results, and they're not pretty.
Yeah.
And I think if anyone had a complaint, it would be you.
Thank you, Sam. Thank you. I appreciate it.
Hey there, I'm Chris Hayes from MSNBC. Thanks for watching MSNBC on YouTube. If you want to keep up to date with the videos we're putting out, you can click subscribe just below me, or click over on this list to see lots of other great videos.